set, secure. Automation and orchestration, endpoint detection and response, network visibility, cloud, containers, DevSecOps, threat intelligence, security platforms. Wondering how to keep up with all the latest security products and trends while still keeping your organization safe? Then stick around to listen to Ready, Set, Secure, the SET Solutions Podcast.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to SET Solutions live stream, Ready, Set, Secure podcast. Sorry, we're a tad bit late start today. Had some technical issues, but we are here. So thanks for joining us. With me, I'm Michael Farnham again, CTO of SET Solutions. I believe we're on like episode 38, something like that. Yeah, it's you were roughly in there. So
just say episode 30-ish.
Episode 30-ish, maybe even 40-ish. We're getting up there. So joining me as always, Justin Hutchins, aka Hutch. How you doing, Hutch?
Good. Glad to be here.
Good to have you. Good to see you face to face.
It's been a minute since
it has been a little bit. So good to have everybody here. Also joining us from Island, Brian, does it go by island.io?
Yeah, either Island or island.io, sure.
So Brian is the Chief Strategy Officer over at Island. Why don't you introduce yourself and kind of what you're doing, and then we'll talk about Island later a little bit in the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And hello to everybody. I'm Brian Kenyon, and as mentioned, I'm Chief Strategy Officer with Island. 20-year industry veteran, have spent most of my time over those years at big players like McAfee, Blue Coat, and Symantec. But recently started on this endeavor with Mike Fay and Dan Amiga at Island, and we're excited to share with you what we're working on over here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. We're pretty. It's the way SET Solutions pretty typically goes along with working with security vendor partners is we do a lot of run through of the tech, and this tech it's brand new, but it's interesting, extremely interesting, and I'm really excited to help launch. I mean, you guys just launched. We'll talk into that. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but you just launched last week, so very interesting stuff. So before we get into the news like we normally do, I'm going to talk about some SET Solutions stuff real quick. So one of the things I want to point out is Chris Hayes on our PS team has put out a blog post all about launching Elastic Cloud on Kubernetes. Using Kubernetes, it's a part one of that. If you want to get into some deep tech and you're really interested in how the cloud can help you with your data analytics project and how maybe you're looking at putting that on Elastic, and Kubernetes is one of those that will give you some security and give you some ability to orchestrate that. And it's pretty cool blog post. It is deep tech, but it gets you started if you want to learn about it. Chris is one of our deeper technical guys here. Also, we've got Rodeo coming soon here in Houston. So it's going to be one of the first ones we've done, and or the first since actually before COVID, because they haven't had it. I was at the one where we started locking down and they canceled the rest of it. So it has been a while since we've done it. So if you want to come join us at the rodeo, we've got a tent out there. Please get with your provider or your account manager and let them know you want to talk to them about it, and maybe you can get you out there at the tent and eat some barbecue. I think the people we've got are really good at chicken, which is kind of interesting, right? And most people are all brisket, sausage, whatever, but ribs, they do chicken.
Barbecue all over the place out there. So even if ours is terrible, you'll find some great barbecue.
Yeah, ours isn't going to be terrible, don't worry. But yeah, it's just, sometimes people don't think, good barbecue chicken there, but it's good stuff. So get with your account manager if you want to join us out there. We're going to have a Tim McGraw concert as well. We're doing some stuff there. So I think there's limited seating there, but please work with your account manager. Maybe we can get you out there to see Tim McGraw. All right, so let's jump into the news segment. We got two articles we're going to go over today. I'm going to talk about DHS launching the first ever cyber safety review board. Pretty interesting, maybe a good step. And then we're going to talk, Hutch's going to talk about MFA adoption, which is pushing phishing actors into reverse proxy solutions. So sounds like that might go a little bit deep. And I think Brian, if you're coming from Blue Coat at some point, that's probably something near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to.
All right. So we'll talk about those two things. So let's jump into it. I'll do mine first. So just because I can do that because I run this podcast. DHS has launched their first ever cyber safety review board. So on the heels of Log4j, Log4j, whatever you want to call it, we've talked about it here, and we've seen a lot of these big vulnerabilities coming out that are affecting a whole lot of companies here lately. This, what I think, is a pretty positive step and something I'm generally seeing positive from a government perspective. And you don't generally hear those two words coming out of my mouth, government and positive. But I do see a lot of movement to get the industry, private industry and public industry kind of together on cybersecurity. And they're launching this under Department of Homeland Security with a lot of pretty big names and what they call luminaries, which is, as good a term as any in the industry, but there's some legit folks involved in this effort. I'm really happy to see some of the people that are involved. There's like Robert Silvers, Heather Atkins, Dimitri, I cannot say his last name and never have, but the former, the CTO co-founder out at CrowdStrike, or used to be out at CrowdStrike. You got Katie that used to be with Microsoft. I can never say her last name either. Forgive me, Katie. But she started Luda Security. You've got some really good big names out here. Wendy Whitmore over at Palo, that's over Unit 42. They're really going to be getting together and looking at some of these incidents and trying to figure out what the activities were that should have happened, maybe get ahead of these type of things. And again, the big thing for me is bringing the public and private industries together. Just really hasn't happened that well. If it did, it was kind of, people just coming together and not anything real official. I'm pretty excited about the move. I don't know. What do you think, Hutch?
So I think at least the idea behind it is definitely a step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I think part of my concern is honestly related to what you see as a good thing in it. And that is, I think there's definitely some risk involved in getting that entanglement between private industry and government policy. And what I mean by that is, if you look back at all the way back to like Eisenhower's farewell address, he talked about the military industrial complex. And we've seen through the years how private industry involved in traditional warfare has really biased our policy and our approach in a lot of cases. And my concern is that this is kind of military industrial complex 2.0 cyber edition, where you are bringing in, like you said, a lot of big names in the private sector and giving them a platform. And I would like to think that there is enough individual integrity to prevent any kind of biased views going into that. But I think that in general, it's tough to stay away from those biases, even if you do. So, I mean, my concern is you're coming to the table and you've got like a VP from Google that's like, what we need is more data analytics. VP from CrowdStrike, we need endpoint visibility. VP from Palo Alto that's like, you know what, network firewalls will do the trick.
Well, I mean,
which are all good solutions.
Well, to that point, even though it wasn't a government regulation, I mean, you saw some of that getting into like PCI DSS, mm-hmm. where some of the industry people were coming in and saying, oh, you need a web application firewall, and it's got to come from Trustwave or whatever. Excuse me, I said the word. Probably shouldn't have mentioned their name, but that was kind of that back then, was an issue where that, and even without it being a governmental thing, you knew it was something that overarching had to be applied to a lot of people across the industry. So
I'd say I like the idea. I'm a little concerned about the potential of bias.
I'm with you. Healthy distrust of authority. I'm with you. Brian, you got any thoughts on this one?
No, I think, wonderful points. I mean, the bias is certainly an area of grave concern, especially as it can get ridiculous with vendors. But I think the reality of it is, as I look at this, it's a step in the right direction if you want to look at a much higher level. In my viewpoint, most of the folks who are writing legislation, voting on legislation, talking about legislation around these areas have very little practical knowledge of what is absolutely happening in the cyber world. So while the inclusion of a lot of cybersecurity firms and vendors in this list of experts and luminaries can be concerning. I think it's a logical next step to bring industry closer to these policymakers. Now, we'll have to watch. We all have to act beyond reproach on this, but if done well, I think it's a great step in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a long time since the Loft guys were in front of Congress and talking about those things and all of the stuff that came from that, when they kind of were in front and then they lost involvement and then the policymakers took off. It's a great point, Brian. I mean, hopefully it ends up being right. We know humans generally are flawed and are susceptible to corruption and all of those things, but knowing some of the people on that list, I'm hoping maybe,
we're at least having the right conversation. Right?
We're at least having the right conversation. I do think one of the things I will give Biden's administration kudos on is they have moved the ball quickly in a lot of places that need to be. To some people, they think to their detriment, moving it too fast and putting deadlines on stuff that maybe shouldn't have happened that quickly. But that's a whole nother podcast, actually. So, all right. Well, we're done with that one. Why don't you get into your topic?
Right. So this was immediately caught my interest because a couple of years ago I did a DEF CON talk about multi-factor authentication bypass. And one of the things that I had mentioned during that talk was a concern that as we see more and more application of or implementation of multi-factor authentication across the board, that just like we see with everything else in cyber, we've got this cat and mouse game where one side gets an edge until the other side adapts and then takes over and just kind of back and forth to no end. And what we've seen is, or what we're seeing and what this article refers to is the use of different technologies such as reverse proxies or relay proxies, which will take somebody's credentials in real time to include their multi-factor authentication token and replay those to the legitimate site, gather the session tokens, and then use a subsequent session hijacking attack in order to assume that user's session. And that allows them to not only capture the credentials, but also assume the role of that user within the context of the application that they're attempting to authenticate to. And I think it's something that we as an industry really need to start paying attention to, because we're getting to a point where, because of these newer, more advanced techniques that we're seeing adversaries use, the traditional approaches of multi-factor authentication are becoming less and less effective. Obviously, it's still a good step in the right direction. It's better than using your traditional username and password. But especially with one-time pass and other push-based multi-factor authentication, if you're not using a cryptographic routine there that the second factor actually authenticates in the same communication band as the initial user's session, we're always going to be at a point where there's still the potential of a replay attack. Now, it obviously has to be done much quicker than it used to have to be done. Yeah. Within that 30 seconds or whatever still a race condition.
Yeah. Well, it's always been a race condition.
But if you've got that automated, it's very easy to replay something in 30 seconds. Within a second, it's there and back.
Well, I mean, is that what you see as a mitigation attack to that? Is also just, the time. Because you look on your Google Authenticator or whatever, that code is sitting there for 30 seconds or whatever, a minute and change.
Yeah. So unfortunately, most of those are vulnerable to these attacks. The real solution or the only effective solution, and I use the term effective loosely because it works, it prevents the attack, is FIDO compliant multi-factor authentication, where you've got like the UB keys or stuff like that. But I say that I use the term effective loosely because while it does stop the attack, they're extremely difficult to implement. And so you've got organizations that implementing this at scale and having everybody hold their physical UB key is kind of back to the old RSA days, where we had the old RSA token that we had to carry around, and they get lost. Their provisioning processes are a pain. So it's something that I think we as an industry need to start thinking about, but there's not a fantastic, really great solution right now to solve it.
Brian, coming from your background, you got any thoughts on this from the reverse proxy
world? Yeah, it's, I think it's interesting that we're now, like you said, in the game of cat and mouse, right? The proliferation of tools on the other end tends to catch up. The reality, I think, from my perspective is, yes, the FIDO compliant authentication, hardware-based tokens, great solution, user experience challenging, everything else in between. When I look at this and I ask, why are we not doing more man-in-the-middle protection? If you really are doing a reverse proxy that's going to steal creds, you have to break in and inspect, which means we're using some certificate in the intermediary that is different than what you're expecting. So why we're allowing those certificates to go, why we're allowing that traffic to be terminated, those are all things we should be aware of as a user, either in our browser or in our endpoint to some degree. And that's not happening at an effective enough level today.
Yeah. Well, maybe something Island can help with.
Maybe foreshadowing a little here, but yeah.
Good segue.
Let's just move over into the main segment, shall we? No, that was good. Yeah, it definitely is. I agree that's what I see as a mitigation technique is having middle protection and making sure everything covered. I mean, there's some indicators of compromise you can look at, not just certificate based. Like, is this taking longer than what typically happen? Or there are things you can do to
coming from a different source IP.
So yeah, any of that. Yeah. So there's things you could do there, and if you include some of that in some way of mitigating it, maybe you can still have your traditional MFA without having to go to a bunch of keys, but protecting it in some other way. So you've got depth there. So, okay. Well, appreciate it. Thank you very much. So now
doom and gloom as always.
Oh yeah. Hutch is, that's what I expect out of Hutch, is always doom and gloom. I'm up here, positive. And he's like, bring us down to earth, and everything's falling apart now. It's a good, we play off each other. So
that's what I'm here for.
You're here for that. And we got another guy on our team, Jared, that we always accuse him of that as well. Yeah. So, okay. Well, let's go ahead and switch over to the main segment. So as I talked about before, we got Brian on here from Island.io, brand new, just came out of stealth. February 1st, if I remember correctly.
Correct. Yeah.
Had the grand plans of, I think, launching at RSA, and that didn't work out, as we all know. RSA is moving into June or something like that. But it's good to see you guys launch. There's a ton of people over there that I've known in past lives since I've been doing this that I'm really stoked about. The people are there because they've got some great reputations, and I expect that those people would not be there if there wasn't something behind this technology. So I'm glad to see that. So, Brian, I just want to give you a chance, 2 or 3 minutes here to give your Island pitch of what it is. I'm not going to spoil it, and then we'll try to start breaking it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, love it. So again, thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to be on with you guys today. Island, like you mentioned, we just came out of stealth on February 1st, so everybody can hit island.io and hit our website. It's finally officially live, but we've been at this now for about 18 months. And the entire mission of the company was based on the concept that one of the most widely deployed applications in the enterprise isn't an enterprise application at all. It's actually the browser. And when we think about this, many of us are using Chrome, some of us are using Edge, those on Macs are maybe living on Safari or Firefox or one of the other browsers you can download for free out there. It's all wonderful tech, and it's changed the way we collaborate. It's changed the way we consume content across the web. It's changed the way we interact with other humans all around the world. But when we think about how that plays out in the enterprise and what we actually have to do to both get it to comply to our own enterprise requirements and also give us the security, visibility, and control that we expect, we end up doing unnatural things to try to get it to work, right? We have to install proxies or some network level break and inspect to be able to see inside of the traffic. And we know definitively that doesn't work on every single interaction and transaction. Huge productivity sites like Office 365 don't want you breaking and inspecting TLS on its way off to Microsoft's cloud. They want that interaction to be as native as possible. So our visibility erodes, our control erodes, and yet most of our work is actually moving to that browser interface, whether it's the adoption of SaaS, whether it's the use of Office 365, or it's the proliferation of remote work and contractors that are now becoming a normal part of our everyday business world. And so when we thought about that problem, we took Island and decided to take the consumer browser that everybody loved, whether it's Chrome or Edge or Brave, they're all built off of an open source project called Chromium. So we took that Chromium project, which gave us the rendering and the look and feel of a browser just like you know it today. But rather than have it tied into advertisers and cookie networks and everything else that we see at a consumer level, we tied it in specifically to work with the enterprise. We tied it into the identity and the directory services. We tied it into malware inspection and DLP systems. And we tied it into the analytics and SIMs, logging and tracking every click and everything a user might do in that interface. So we instantly give organizations full control and visibility over everything a user might do when they're interacting with the web. So full control over uploads and downloads and copy and paste, and who can take screen captures, who can access and who can authenticate to these applications, all the while in a native web browser that everybody feels comfortable and natural in. And so it's an exciting way to start implementing DLP controls. It's an exciting way to enable a remote worker, whether it's on a BYOD device or it's a contractor connecting on another system. It's been a great vehicle to bring in about security controls in a native and seamless way.
Nice. That's a good rundown. I mean, you're not wrong. Enterprise, the most deployed app is browser. Everybody uses it. We use it every day. Integrations through our directory. I mean, I don't launch near as many applications directly on my desktop anymore. It's almost all through a browser.
So that's where your vast majority of your threats are coming in too.
Absolutely, right? So first question, and I'm going to ask it because I believe I've asked you this before, and I've asked Matt Poor over there this and everything else. There's a lot of people out there who have PTSD from browser isolation.
Yep.
I'm not going to name any names, but there were a couple or three of them, and it absolutely broke everything. Great idea. Whether you were using software to do it or it had integration into the hardware that came on a lot of those laptops and machines, it just didn't work. This is not browser isolation, correct?
It's not browser isolation in the way we think about browser isolation today. So let me break it down for you. So the concept of browser isolation that everybody's familiar with was when a user goes to a site that I don't trust or I don't explicitly know, I want it to detonate and render in a container or in a device that isn't my end user's compute device. And then I'll use principles of like VDI to just paint the browser screen with the image of the website. So there's no interactive code running on that end user's browser. Now, that was done for a couple of reasons, really, in reality. One is because you didn't want good stuff from your organization ending up on that website, right? You didn't want it to, harvest credentials, through phishing or other methods. And you didn't want it to accidentally entice the user to upload sensitive documents or do anything like that. Similarly, you want to stop bad stuff from coming into your organization, right? You want to stop bad code from being executed. You want to stop, drive-by downloads and other types of information stealing and potentially malware infiltrating techniques. Those were the really two basic conditions that we did. And in order to do that, we went through, like you mentioned, all kinds of hardware and software-based, configurations and additions to our proxy and to our network stack. And so what ended up happening was just a subpar end user experience. So we're not natively browser isolation, meaning we don't require any of that hardware or any of the software container-based capabilities. But everything that we talked about, stopping bad stuff from coming in and preventing your good known trade secrets and credentials from going out, Island is fully capable of doing.
Okay, that's good to know. So no PTSD coming back. We're not gonna have fits. One of the things when I was looking at it initially is I noticed is that you've got to have knowledge and a pretty deep level knowledge of whatever if it's a SaaS type of an app that you're going to, let's say a Salesforce or whatever that is, you got to have a pretty good knowledge and keep up with what they're doing. And having worked for a SaaS vendor before, we would just willy-nilly change our interface at the drop of our hat because we could, right? I mean, how are you staying up to speed with what they're doing to make sure you're staying at that level? I mean, if something moves in their app or whatever.
It's an awesome question. And the reality is the answer is quite simple. We don't.
Okay.
Unlike a CASB, and we all got trained from CASBs in this world, right? And CASBs typically integrate with the backend APIs of your SaaS provider, your cloud provider. And those APIs change from time to time, and there's no standardization across cloud apps, right? So Office 365's APIs are different than Google Workspace's, different than Amazon's, and there's no standardization of when they update or how. So CASB's always had to build for every single app, and they always had to maintain that update. And that's why when we licensed CASB technology, we paid by application, we paid maintenance on it to make sure it continued to work. At Island, because we've built this off of Chromium, every major SaaS and online web application today renders inside that Chromium framework. So we don't do any front-end integration to make a website render correctly or behave correctly inside of our browser. Now, our controls, how you prevent uploads, downloads, copy and paste, those are broad across all sites. So we're not doing anything to implement specific in Salesforce different than in ServiceNow. So those same capabilities extend across every application, whether it's SaaS or whether it's something you built 15 years ago and still living in your data center and you access with a web application. All of it is native inside Island without keeping up with the app.
Absolutely. What do you think, Hutch? You got any?
Yeah, curious what you guys are doing as far as enabling larger organizations to manage it at scale. So are there opportunities for, especially if you have a bunch of different sub-organizations that need different restrictions, different types of controls and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple of things, first off, nobody at Island, and we never walk into an organization and say, hey, listen, we want you to swap out your primary browser. We want you to get rid of Chrome or Edge or any of those things. In fact, what we can actually do is we've worked and integrated at different levels of technology enforcement to do something we call browser enforcement. So think of this concept. This set of users and going to this application, I want to ensure that they only originate from Island. So if they're coming from Chrome or they're coming from Safari or if they're coming from something else, I want to make sure that they can't get access to that application, and I'll redirect them to come from Island. And so we can be deployed in little pockets of users. We can be deployed across groups of users. So we can make the consumption of the technology very easy, meaning you can roll it out in pieces and parts of the organization and not have to roll it out to everybody to get value right out of the box. But to that point, we have capabilities in our policy that give you the ability to build policy based on groups, based on function, based on organizational unit. So how you run your one particular line of business or one particular division might be completely different than how the browser is enforced in another division. You have complete control over that from a policy perspective.
So from an integration standpoint, then all the major directories, the Microsofts, you could integrate with Okta. You've got conditional access based on others, ping or whatever that may be. If you're kind of tying into that existing identity framework that's already there, that makes it, that has become robust, quite frankly, over the last 5 years. It's really, really, really improved with that integration. And you could, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're saying we're probably not going to have that trauma that we had with browser isolation. You technically could be the primary browser for an organization if they wanted to to make that rolled out. Is that correct? Are you feeling confident enough to say that you could do that now?
Yeah, absolutely. So to your first point, you're exactly right. We integrate into the IDP, and we can integrate directly at the directory level too. So AD, Azure AD, ADFS, Ping, Okta, OneLogin, all of the IDPs, SAML based. We have natural integrations too. So hooking into that directory service gives us the ability to do things like you mentioned, conditional access, to grant people access based on the device they're coming from. We have MDM capabilities directly in the Island Enterprise browser itself. So we can inspect the device. We can determine if the device is safe enough. You can even build policy around that. And you may say that if you're coming from this particular device is untrusted and doesn't have AV running and doesn't have encryption enabled, that you can get access to these web applications, but they're read-only for you. So you can't make any modifications and you can't download anything. So you have a very, very granular engine on which to do this policy. Now, as it speaks to primary browsers, this is our goal. Like, we would obviously hope to earn the right to become an organization's primary browser. There's a whole lot of change management and friction that comes with it. So it's something we talk about just earning over time and helping them solve some critical and unique use cases early on and continue to build confidence and momentum behind what Island can do. And what organizations see is, once we are the primary browser, how they implement DLP inside Island, how they can implement things like URL filtering, how they can implement application access and visibility, may have substantial changes across their security posture and tooling, as it gets a lot simpler once you have control over that last mile of the web browser.
Interesting.
I'm curious, what would be your recommendation to organizations that still have to support other browsers or still have to allow other browsers for kind of legacy support, but would prefer for most use cases their users to use your managed browser, if the concern is that users will just see the managed browser as more restrictive and kind of move off of it for that reason?
Yeah, so obviously there's a couple different ways, and we have customers looking at this in a number of different ways, right? So what they look at is they say, you know what, Island is for work. And so your work assets are enforced in Island. If you want to get to Salesforce, if you want to get to Office 365 or Box or Corporate Box, you have to do so through Island. If you want to get to Amazon and Yahoo and YouTube, you can open Chrome or Safari and go right ahead. We're going to apply the same web filtering on top of it and make sure you're not going anywhere dangerous, but we're not tracking that or managing it. Now, as it pertains to the primary browser, how that looks and how that can actually manifest, there's a lot that can get deployed in terms of controlling the other browsers on the system. So if you want to say, Island is the primary browser, we're going to make it so that Chrome and Edge can't get out. There's a number of things you can do through GPOs on Windows systems, other things you can do on Macs to control that at a much, much broader level.
Great.
We're getting close to the end, but people know me, hopefully, that I'm pretty honest about being excited about tech. I'm not from Missouri, but I definitely want to be, shown the proof. But I'm excited about this. I think it's a different way of looking at it. It doesn't have some of the same issues that we've seen in the past by trying to come at it from the browser perspective. It's not like this is a trend. The browser is here to stay. The internet's going to stick around for a while. This is an exciting aspect. I'm kind of excited. I know we talked a little bit more about how you're potentially going to get into more than just web apps and do other things and control some of those other messaging tools. So I'm excited to see what happens with that in the future. I don't know. It just seems pretty cool tech and in a good spot. It's not going to fix everything. Nothing does, but it's going to fix some big aspects. So it's pretty cool. Brian, any parting thoughts before we sign off?
No, listen, everybody here at Island truly appreciates the opportunity with SET. It's been a great partnership early on. I think, we have a lot of history between a lot of the folks here at Island. We've been fortunate. I've myself, as well as our two co-founders, Dan and Mike, have had a long tenured history in this industry, and we've been able to steal and recruit the best from our networks over the years and put together an all-star team here. And so, I guess a parting thought, when you think of Island, we're building an enterprise browser to be your enterprise's browser. Everything from how it looks to how it messages the user is all up to you and your organization. Get control back of that last mile and let Island help you do it. And thank you to the SET team. Absolutely. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. We'll include some links, obviously, to Island when we post this post live, in the podcast version. There's some really good materials that Island has put together. I'm very impressed with the marketing of this. It seems like a kind of a no BS marketing type of thing. It's really legit and quick and to the point and tells you the real stuff. So thanks for joining us, Brian. Really appreciate it. Hutch, you want to say your goodbyes?
Certainly.
Tell Brian.
Thanks, Brian, for joining us. And thank you to all the users, as our listeners, viewers, however you're consuming this.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here in the studio. And for everybody, thanks again for joining us. Go check out island.io. If you got any questions when you get this post, please post them on the comments section or just reach out to us via our contact form. We're happy to connect you with anybody over at Island and get you more information there. And for everybody else, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you on the next in a couple of weeks.